Most of the time I disagree with a left-wing website called Canadaland. They can be deceptive and unethical, and once their boss, Jesse Brown, falsely defamed one of our writers, and we're still pursuing them for that. I went on their show about a decade ago as a guest. It was deceptively edited. The only time that's ever happened to me in my life, actually. There are problems over at Canadaland that go to honesty and character, not just ideology. But even a stopped clock is right twice a day. And Jesse Brown, the boss over there, well, his review of Justin Trudeau's plans to license journalism is spot on. I should say that Canadaland and Jesse Brown, despite my ideological differences with them, are one of the very few news outlets in Canada that don't take government money. Their chief medium is podcasting, and they do pretty well at it. They're often in the top 10 most popular podcasts in Canada. Again, not my cup of tea, but they obviously have some talent. But they're worried about this journalism licensing business, the stuff we're suing the government over. You'll remember we applied for this status, this license to have the government designation QCJO, Qualified Canadian Journalism Organization, and we were rejected for the most absurd reasons. I mean, I just still can't even get over this. They claim that only 1% of what we do is news. I'm serious. You know, I checked, and we've published almost exactly 30,000 individual news stories since we were born 7 years ago. I think I gave you a slightly different estimate last week, but now I have the exact number. I had our team pull some stats. We have published 29,801 items we could call news, as opposed to like a sign-up page or a merchandise page on the website. That's an average of more than 10 stories a day, 7 days a week for 7 years. And that's just on the website. It doesn't count all of our social media platforms like Twitter or Facebook or whatever. The idea that only 1% of that, or 298 items over the course of our entire life, are news, is absurd and embarrassing to the government. For example, we have 144 stories that we call exclusives. Big scoops, usually through access to information requests or leaked info or tips. You know, just FYI, every morning, at 7:30 a.m. Eastern Time, our journalists receive an email briefing note from our researcher pointing out breaking news and events of the day just to get their noggins jogging. Then at 10 a.m., we have a news meeting where each of the reporters makes their pitch to our managing editor, Sheila. At 5 p.m., we have a follow-up news meeting to ensure things are being published in a timely manner. Like I say, more than 10 news stories a day, every day of the year on average, actually 82 a week to be precise. And the government is saying that we don't even publish one single news story a week. I'm sorry, that's just weird. We're suing, obviously. If you missed my details on that, please go read our lawsuit at wearesuingtrudeau.com. But back to Canadaland and their editor, Jesse Brown. He made a series of tweets today about this very issue, and I'd like to read them to you, which I normally wouldn't do, but he's spot on. And I think it's valuable that he's a leftist. He's woke. He's all the things you're supposed to be to get in good with Trudeau, except he won't bend the knee and merge with the government. So far, at least in his podcast today and in his tweets today, he intimated that maybe to survive, he has to join them. He hasn't yet. Here, let me read it. It's a thread of about a dozen tweets, but I think they're good. He says, "This is what is poorly understood due to secrecy, the media bailout, and the Online News Act puts all legacy news in Canada under government-dependent support. TV, radio, newspapers, all of it." Okay, just stop right there. Any government that uses the phrase News Act, like a news law, is all you need to know about them. There is no room for the government in regulating news. That's censorship by definition from the beginning. You know, it reminds me, you might recall that Bible Bill Aberhart, the social credit premier of Alberta in the dirty 30s, he brought in a law called the Accurate News and Information Act. And that was 80 plus years ago. It was literally designed to fight fake news. It required any newspaper of the day to run a government rebuttal next to any story they said was fake. Now, that law was struck down by the Supreme Court of Canada, and the Edmonton Journal, who fought against it, they actually won a special Pulitzer Prize for fighting it. Today, the Edmonton Journal has signed up for the Online News Act. If only Bill Aberhart knew that all he had to do was bribe the Edmonton Journal with a carrot, not hit them with a stick. I'll keep reading Jesse Brown's posts. His next one, he says, "Combination of government money plus Facebook money plus Google money will fund all legacy news production in Canada. In over 100 cases, it already does. It's a good point. Google and Facebook are already the largest spenders of lobbying money in America. I'm sure it's the same in Canada. They have huge interests. Really, they're as large as countries, profitable countries. Just like Trudeau, they know the best way to get good press is just to buy it. And if Trudeau forces them to give money to journalists, those journalists, I understand, have to sign special contracts, or even if they just know that the money is coming from Google and Facebook. I mean, you don't think they're going to pull their punches in their coverage of Facebook and Google? Of course. As in, they'll never criticize them again. What percentage of news costs are subsidized? It's a secret, but based on info from Australia, whose laws we based our policy on, 30% of news costs at one org are now covered by big tech. Imagine that. Secret funding from Google and Facebook at the direction of Justin Trudeau. That's what's in the Online News Act. Imagine a journalist who would sign a non-disclosure agreement with the most powerful and rich companies in the world. That person is no longer a journalist, is he? How can you be? You're keeping secrets, not telling them now. Add to that the 25% government wage subsidy, and it's reasonable to estimate that more than 50% of Canadian editorial expenses will be paid by the government big tech combo. It's a good point. You've got so many layers of grift here. Sometimes people make fun of me because so often I'm asking our viewers to chip in to pay for this or that thing at Rebel News. And it's true, and it's annoying, and I'm sorry for that. But it's also 100% voluntary. No one has to give us a dime, and frankly, 99% of our viewers don't. But if you get money extracted from Canadians by Trudeau for you, we don't do that. We don't take forced money. We don't take subsidies. We don't take big grants. And now, shake down money from big tech too. They really are state broadcasters, all of them now, aren't they? Here's what Jesse Brown says next. To think that this won't change how the media covers the government and Facebook and Google is a fantasy it already has. To think that this won't hurt public trust in journalism is to ignore both data and what we hear from newsreaders every day. He's right on that. It's a great point. There are a whole raft of reasons why no one trusts the media anymore. Their conduct during the pandemic is a big part of it, but everyone can tell the media is no longer a watchdog. They're a lapdog. They're in on it. Here's an idea I didn't think of myself, Jesse Brown says. As Dr. O.W. argued on Canada Land years ago, this doesn't just lock in legacy news orgs at the expense of startups. It also locks in the power of Google and Facebook, putting a critical part of our democracy on their permanent payroll. Exactly. You're making Google and Facebook parts of our government, parts of our media industry. Who died and appointed them God? If Google and Facebook fall or are disrupted, the news business loses its sugar daddy. Yeah, and may we pray for that disruption of those companies to come. Brown continues, how does Google determine how much to pay news orgs? As Google's VP of News, Richard Gingras, reveals here, it involves the number of articles a news org publishes. The incentive is to pump out content. He's referring to Google VP of News, Richard Gingras. He made those remarks at a Liberal Party conference hosted by a lobby group called Canada 2020. See, Google is deeply involved with this and with the Liberal Party, and you better believe that politics comes up all the time. They hire directly from the government. That's an excerpt from my daily show, The Ezra Levant Show. Every day I do a monologue on the news of the day, then I interview an interesting guest, and then I read my hate mail. You gotta subscribe. Go to rebelnews.com.